I used to believe my family was my entire world. We weren't rich, but we had a reputation, one my parents guarded fiercely. Respect, my father would always say, is everything. Growing up, I followed every rule, every expectation. I was the obedient daughter, the one who never argued, never stepped out of line. I thought that if I did everything right, I would always belong. Then I met Daniel. It wasn't some dramatic movie-like moment. It was simple, real. He held the door open for me at a bookstore, smiled, and made a small joke about how we both reached for the same novel. But there was something about him, something calm, warm, and genuine. He listened when I spoke, really listened, like my words mattered. With Daniel, I felt seen. Weeks turned into months, and somewhere along the way, I fell in love. Not the kind of love that's loud and showy, but the kind that feels like home. He respected me, supported me, and never once tried to change who I was. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to be perfect. I was just myself. But I knew my family wouldn't understand. I kept Daniel a secret for as long as I could, not because I was ashamed of him, but because I was afraid of them. Afraid of their judgment, their expectations, their quiet but cutting words. Still, a part of me hoped maybe love would be enough. Maybe they would see what I saw. So one evening, with trembling hands and a racing heart, I told them, "I want you to meet someone," I said, my voice barely steady. At first my mother smiled. My father nodded approvingly. My siblings leaned in with curiosity. For a brief moment everything felt normal, until Daniel walked through the door. The air shifted instantly. My mother's smile disappeared, her face tightening as if she had tasted something bitter. My father's eyes darkened, scanning Daniel from head to toe. The room grew cold, so cold it felt like I couldn't breathe. "This is Daniel," I said softly, trying to hold onto my courage. He's the one I want to marry." Silence. Then my father let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "This is a joke, right?" he said. I shook my head, my heart pounding louder with every second. "It's not." The next few moments felt like a storm I couldn't escape. My father's voice rose, filled with anger and disbelief. My mother began to cry. Not gently, but dramatically, as if I had betrayed her in the worst way possible. My siblings whispered among themselves, their faces twisted with judgment. "How could you do this to us?" My mother said, her voice breaking. "What will people say?" "It's not about people." I tried to explain, my voice trembling. "I love him. That is not love." My father snapped. "That is a mistake." Daniel stood beside me the entire time, calm but firm. He tried to speak, to show them who he really was, but they didn't listen. They had already decided. "This ends now," my father said coldly. "You will not see him again." I felt something inside me crack. "I can't do that," I whispered. The room went completely silent. "Then you can leave," he said, his voice like ice. "If you choose him, you are no longer part of this family." The words hit harder than anything else. For a moment I hesitated, not because I doubted Daniel, but because I was about to lose everything I had ever known. My home, my family, my place in the world. Then Daniel gently reached for my hand, and I knew, "I choose him." I said, my voice shaking, but certain. That was the moment everything ended. My mother turned away, as if she couldn't even look at me. My father pointed toward the door. My siblings avoided my eyes completely. Within minutes, my belongings were thrown into a small bag. Years of memories reduced to something I could carry in my arms. I stood at the doorway, hoping, just hoping, someone would stop me. No one did, so I walked out. The door closed behind me with a final echoing sound. And just like that, I was no longer their daughter. Tears blurred my vision as I stood outside, the weight of what I had lost crashing over me. But then I felt Daniel's hand tighten around mine. Steady, warm, real. "We'll be okay," he said softly. I looked at him, at the man I had chosen, and for the first time that night I felt something stronger than fear. Hope. I had lost my family, but I had chosen love, and somehow I knew this was only the beginning. The first night after I left my family, I didn't sleep. Not because there wasn't a place to rest, but because my mind refused to be still. Every word my father had said echoed in my head. Every tear my mother cried replayed like a punishment. I kept staring at the ceiling of Daniel's small apartment, wondering if I had just destroyed my entire life in a single decision. Daniel didn't say much that night. He didn't need to. He simply stayed. He made me tea when my hands wouldn't stop shaking. He gave me his bed and took the couch without hesitation. And when I broke down in the middle of the night, he sat beside me, quietly reminding me that I wasn't alone anymore. That was the beginning of everything. The early days were harder than I ever imagined. Love doesn't pay rent. It doesn't silence the whispers of judgment from strangers. It doesn't magically erase the fear of uncertainty. Daniel and I had to fight for every small step forward. We both worked long hours, sometimes 2 jobs each, just to keep up with bills. Our apartment was tiny, barely enough space for the 2 of us, with peeling paint on the walls and a heater that worked only when it felt like it. There were nights we ate instant noodles and laughed about it, pretending it was a choice rather than necessity. But behind those laughs there were struggles. I missed my family more than I wanted to admit. There were moments I reached for my phone, thinking about calling my mother, only to remember there was no one on the other end anymore. Birthdays passed in silence. Holidays felt empty. The absence was loud, constant, and painful, and the world outside wasn't always kind either. People stared, sometimes they whispered, sometimes they didn't bother hiding their opinions at all. I saw the way strangers looked at us when we walked together, the assumptions they made, the quiet judgment that followed us into restaurants, workplaces, even public spaces. There were days it broke me. I don't know if I'm strong enough for this. I admitted once, my voice barely above a whisper. Daniel looked at me, not with pity, but with something deeper. "You don't have to be strong all the time," he said. "That's why you have me," and he meant it. When I felt like giving up, he reminded me why we started. When I doubted myself, he believed in me enough for both of us. He never once made me feel like I had sacrificed too much. Instead, he made sure I knew I had chosen something real. Slowly, things began to change. I decided to continue my education, something I had once put aside to meet my family's expectations. It wasn't easy. Balancing studies with work felt overwhelming, but Daniel supported me every step of the way. He stayed up late helping me prepare for exams, encouraged me when I felt exhausted, and celebrated even my smallest achievements like they were victories. Years passed, and those small victories began to grow. I found a stable job, then a better one. Opportunities I never imagined started opening up. Daniel, too, worked tirelessly, eventually starting something of his own, a small business that slowly but surely began to succeed. We moved out of that cramped apartment into a modest home. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't felt since before everything fell apart. Peace. Our home wasn't just built with money. It was built with patience, sacrifice, and love. It was filled with laughter, late-night conversations, and quiet moments that meant everything. There was no judgment, no expectations to be someone else, just us. Somewhere along the way, the pain of losing my family didn't disappear, but it softened. Because I had gained something else, something stronger, something unbreakable. One evening, as I stood in our living room, watching Daniel fix a loose shelf while music played softly in the background, I realized something that changed everything. The life my family said would ruin me had become the life that saved me. 9 years ago, I had walked out of my home with nothing but a small bag and a broken heart. Now I stood in a home filled with love, stability, and dignity. They thought I had lost everything, but the truth was I had finally found it. 9 years can change everything, or at least that's what I believed. By the time nearly a decade had passed, the girl who once stood crying outside her parents' house felt like someone I barely recognized. Life had reshaped me in ways I never expected. I wasn't fragile anymore. I wasn't searching for approval or afraid of standing alone. Because I wasn't alone, Daniel and I had built something real, something steady. Our home was warm, filled with quiet laughter, and the kind of peace that doesn't need to prove itself. Our days weren't perfect, but they were ours, and that was enough. I had stopped looking back, until the day the past came knocking. It was an ordinary afternoon. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting soft shadows across the living room. I had just finished organizing a few things when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. At first, I almost ignored it. But some quiet instinct made me walk toward the door. Each step felt heavier than it should have, like my body already knew what my mind didn't. When I opened it, the world stopped. My mother stood there. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. She looked different. Older, thinner, the sharp confidence she once carried replaced by something worn and tired. But her eyes, those familiar eyes, were the same. The same ones that had once looked at me with disappointment as I walked away. "Ayesha," she said softly, as if the name hadn't been abandoned for years. I didn't respond. I couldn't. 9 years of silence stood between us, heavy and unspoken. "You're not going to invite me in?" she asked after a pause, her tone shifting slightly less emotional, more expectant. That's when something inside me clicked. No apology, no hesitation, just expectation. I stepped aside silently, letting her walk in, not because I had forgiven her, but because I needed to hear what she had come to say. Her eyes scanned the house the moment she entered. I saw it clearly. The surprise, the quiet calculation. She noticed everything, the furniture, the decor, the space, the life I had built without them. "You've done well," she said, her voice carrying something I couldn't quite name. I folded my arms slightly, keeping my distance. "Why are you here?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she sat down as if she still belonged there, as if 9 years hadn't erased that right. "Our family is going through a difficult time," she began. "Your father's business failed. There are debts, serious ones. Your brother tried to manage things, but it only made it worse." I listened in silence, my heart strangely calm. "We need help," she continued, "and you're the only one who can provide it now." There it was. Not "I missed you," not "I'm sorry," just "we need you." I felt a quiet ache rise in my chest, not sharp like before, but deep and familiar. "You disappeared for 9 years," I said slowly. "Not a single call, not a message, nothing." Her expression hardened slightly. "You made your choice." I almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Yes," I said, "I did." Her gaze shifted, landing briefly on a photo frame nearby Daniel and I, smiling, happy. For a second, something unreadable crossed her face. "He's not here?" she asked, her tone casual but pointed. "He lives here," I replied calmly. "This is his home too." She didn't respond, but I caught the faint disapproval in her silence. "Look," she said after a moment, leaning forward slightly. "Whatever happened in the past, it's done. We're still your family, and family helps each other." The words felt heavy, almost ironic. Family, the same word they used when they turned me away, the same word they ignored when I needed them the most. And where was this family? I asked quietly, when I had nothing. She didn't answer. Instead, she sighed, as if I was making things unnecessarily difficult. "This isn't about the past," she said firmly. "This is about responsibility." I stared at her, really stared this time, not as a daughter longing for approval, but as someone who had finally learned her worth. 9 years ago, her words would have broken me. Now they barely moved me. There was no guilt, no confusion, just clarity. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. "Sit," I said calmly, gesturing toward the living room. She looked slightly surprised, but nodded, because she thought this meant I was going to agree, but she didn't understand. I wasn't inviting her to stay. I was giving myself the chance to finally speak. My mother sat across from me, her posture stiff, but her eyes quietly scanning the room again, as if trying to measure the life I had built without her. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was clear, honest, final. For a moment, I just looked at her. 9 years ago, this woman's approval meant everything to me. Her words shaped my choices, her expectations controlled my life. I had spent years trying to be the daughter she wanted, and in one night she erased me. Now she sat in my home, asking for help as if nothing had happened. I took a slow breath. "You said this isn't about the past. I began, my voice calm and steady. But the past is exactly why we're here. She shifted slightly, but didn't interrupt. Do you remember that night? I continued, when I stood in front of you and told you I was in love. Her lips pressed into a thin line, but she stayed silent. You didn't ask me if I was happy. I said. You didn't try to understand. You didn't even listen. You judged me, insulted the person I loved, and then you threw me out like I was nothing. Her eyes flickered for a second, but she quickly looked away. I had nowhere to go. I added, my voice softer now, but not weak. I lost my family in a single moment, and not one of you came after me. The room felt heavier with every word. When I struggled, you weren't there, I said. When I cried myself to sleep, wondering if I made the biggest mistake of my life, you weren't there. When I needed support, guidance, even just a simple "Are you okay?" I paused, letting the silence finish the sentence. You were gone. My mother finally spoke, her tone defensive. You chose that life. I nodded slowly. Yes, I did. And for the first time, there was no hesitation in my voice. I chose a man who respected me, I said, who stood by me when I had nothing, who never made me feel like I had to earn my place in his life. At that moment, the front door opened softly. Daniel stepped inside. He must have sensed something was different because his eyes immediately found mine. I gave him a small, reassuring nod. He didn't ask questions. He didn't interrupt. He simply walked in and stood quietly beside me. And somehow, that said everything. My mother glanced at him briefly, her expression unreadable, but she didn't speak. This, I said, gesturing around the room, everything you see, we built it, together, from nothing. I turned back to her, my gaze steady. You told me I was making a mistake. I continued, that my life would fall apart, that I would regret choosing him over my family. I let out a small breath. But the truth is, this is the best decision I ever made. For the first time, she had no response. No argument, no control, just silence. And now, I said gently, you're here, not because you missed me, not because you regret what happened, but because you need something. Her face tightened slightly. We're still your family. I shook my head, not in anger, but in clarity. Family doesn't disappear when things get hard, I said. Family doesn't turn love into shame, and family doesn't come back only when it's convenient. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. I don't hate you, I added after a moment. I really don't. That seemed to surprise her more than anything else. But I've learned something over the years, I continued. Love without respect isn't love, and forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what someone did to you. I took a step closer, but only enough to be heard, not to close the distance between us. I've built a life where I'm valued, I said. Where I'm safe, where I don't have to prove my worth to anyone. My voice softened, but it didn't break. And I'm not going to risk that. Her eyes widened slightly, as if the reality was finally sinking in. You're refusing to help us? She asked. I held her gaze. I'm choosing myself, I replied. The room went completely still. For a long moment she didn't move, didn't speak. It was as if she was seeing me for the first time, not as the daughter she controlled, but as the woman she lost. Slowly she stood up. There were 1,000 things she could have said in that moment. Apologies, regret, even anger, but she said nothing, because deep down she understood. I walked her to the door, not out of obligation, but out of closure. As she stepped outside, she hesitated briefly, as if expecting me to stop her. I didn't, because this time I wasn't the one being left behind. The door closed softly, and just like that, the past stayed where it belonged, behind me. I turned back into the home I had built, with love, with strength, with dignity. Daniel's hand found mine, just like it had 9 years ago. But this time I wasn't afraid, because I hadn't just chosen love. I had chosen myself, and that was the sweetest revenge of all.